Hello, my name is Kwanghyun Go, who is a master degree candidate at the Digital and Cultural Contents at the Gyeonggu University. I'll present our study on awareness of the digital game rating classification, focusing on comparison between adults and adolescents. Our study is to know the different awareness between different generations. Overall, the results of our study tell that there are statistically different awarenesses of the game rating rules between adults and adolescents. I'll talk about the main results and analysis after the research background and method. Then I'll suggest a conclusion of our study. Digital game began with Alan Turing's computer chess game and have evolved from the 2000s to games using virtual reality and social network services based on information and communication technologies. In 2020, the global game industry totaled $174.9 billion, recording 19.6% year-over-year, and is still showing a prominent growth trend. However, problems and controversy about games such as violence, speculativeness, and sexuality have also increased. In particular, the expansion of such negative recognitions has promoted the regulation of the game industry. Nevertheless, digital games are becoming a universal leisure culture for young people and an important tool for peer relationships. However, differences in recognitions about games between adolescents and adults remain significant, and relatively few attempts to compare these recognitions. Accordingly, we try to find out what differences in recognitions about games and policies related to game between adolescents and adults. The negative recognition of games was also explained in the media moral panic theory. Media moral panic refers to a collective action that occurs to protect society or morals by excluding dangerous culture, resulting in social unrest due to the spread of exaggerated recognition. According to this study, negative recognition of media is closely related to media regulation. It is also said that adult class who is conservative toward the media may be relatively hostile to new media such as game. The main characteristics of media moral panic include concerns about harmful objects, hostility, social consensus of threat, and information distortion. Besides, these threats are actively reproduced through a selective bias process, which leads to vague fears and negative media recognition of older generations unfamiliar with new media. Moreover, this negative recognition can also affect the formulation or agreement on media regulatory policy. In other research, parents with children of adolescents are seriously concerned about the exposure of harmful content through the internet or new media, and complain that it is challenging to block access. Therefore, we felt the need to control harmful media systematically, and adolescents are also aware of the necessity in matters such as content rating service. And education and learning through games are also recognized negatively by more than 70% of parents' generation. They think that playing media-based games from an early age will harm physical and emotional development. According to a study on online game recognition, people's recognition of games is divided into games are obstacles to study, games are just games, games are a blood of life, and games are vaguely bad. In the research, over 30 ages corresponded to game is an obstacle to study, and game is bad. And negative recognition about online game is strong. However, teens and 20s are relatively positive about online games. Besides, there was a large difference in recognition between the adolescent group and the parent group regarding online games' harmfulness. A negative recognition such as violence, addiction, the idea of reducing the sense of reality, impairing online games' sociality were higher in the parent group than in the adolescent group. In the case of teachers who direct adolescents, the type of game is just play was the most common type. But if the numbers of types, objects of addiction, obstructions to study, vaguely bad things is combined, it revealed a greater number of people. According to the study that analyzed 184 research trends for adolescents, many studies indicated that the outcome factor was a negative factor, with a positive factor of about 4% and a negative factor of about 55%. However, there are many positive discussions about the use of games as educational functions. The game rating classification enforcement is used to classify video games into appropriate classes for each. There are 7 criteria for the classification, and the game rating classification is divided into for all, 12 years old, 15 years old, 18 years old, and for testing. Its purposes are to secure the ethics and publicity of the game, to prevent induction or promotion of gambling, to protect adolescents, and to prevent the distribution of illegal game products. What are the games? Under the Game Industry Promotion Act, the definition of game material includes programs, video clips, machinery, and devices which are used for leisure, learning, and exercise. Are all games required to receive a rating classification? Every game material has to be presented and receive a rating classification for each platform. Under the Game Industry Promotion Act, anyone who intends to produce or distribute games for the purpose of selling or providing them for public use shall obtain a rating of their content by the board prior to their production and distribution. And this is the game rating process. First, Game Rating and Administration Committee receive a game. Then, they analyze and rate the game. If the game rejected, game developer of the game can throw an objection to the reclassification committee. If someone violates a game rating classification enforcement, the person can be sentenced not exceeded 2 years imprisonment or has to pay a fine of 20 million won or less. Also, all games received a game have to display content descriptors about the game when serviced or distributed. Game developer has to put a pictogram corresponding to the contents and display from 1 to 3 stars according to following rating criteria. Content descriptors is divided into 7 categories. First, sexuality refers references to explicit depictions of sexual behavior, possibly including nudity. Violence references to scenes involving aggressive conflict, may contain blood scenes, PvP or PK. Fear, horror, threatening references to horrifying action. Language references to inappropriate language. Alcohol, tobacco, drug reference to images of alcoholic beverages, tobacco products, illegal drug use, crime, anti-societal or anti-governmental messages, references to images of crime, anti-societal or anti-governmental messages, gambling, references to gambling or betting, simulated gambling. So in this research, we had a research question. Are there different awareness of game rating system between adolescent and adult groups? And we have hypothesized each. Major hypothesis is there are different awareness between adults and adolescent groups. And test hypotheses are the following. The sample was collected by survey in the second half of 2020. The survey was conducted through web and mobile platform. The total sample size is 1,730, and there were 230 adolescents and 1,500 adults, and the test method was t-test. There were 230 adolescents, consisted of 120 males and 110 females. There were 17 middle school students and 203 high school students. Also, it was found that the average weekday game time was about 2.2 hours. And there were 1,500 adults, consisted of 764 males and 736 females, and 310 in their 20s, 289 in their 30s, and 347 in their 40s, 346 were in their 50s, and 190 were aged 60 to 65. Also, the average game time on weekdays was about 1.5 hours. Here is survey questionnaires. Recognition level of game rating classification mark was measured by the question. Do you know the meaning of the game rating classification mark? Recognition level of game content descriptors was measured by the question. Do you know the meaning of the game content descriptors? And usefulness of displaying game rating classification was measured by the question. How useful do you think classifying or displaying the game rating? Usefulness of displaying game content descriptors was measured by the question. How useful do you think displaying of the game content descriptors? Recognition level of the game rating and administration committee was measured by the question. Did you know the game rating and administration committee before the survey? Support level of the game rating and administration committee was measured by the question. How much do you support the activities of the game rating and administration committee? Negative game recognition level was measured by the question. Adolescents playing of the game is a serious social problem, and digital games can harm the mental health of children and adolescents. As shown in Table 5, an independent sample t-test was conducted to find out whether there is a difference between adolescents and adults in recognition and usefulness of rating classification and content descriptors, and recognition and support level of the game rating and administration committee, and negative game recognition. The recognition level of game rating classification mark was statistically significant. The average for adolescents is 1.72 and for others is 2.36. The difference between the average is 0.64, and the result is that adolescents relatively know the meaning of classification than others. The recognition level of game content descriptors is statistically significant. The average is 2.04 for adolescents, and the average is 2.64 for others. The difference between the average is 0.6, indicating that adolescents are relatively more aware of the meaning of content descriptors than others. The usefulness of displaying game rating classification was statistically significant. The average for the adolescents is 2.86, and for the others is 2.69. The difference between the average is 0.17. The results show that others think displaying game rating classification is more useful than on adolescents. However, it is found that the usefulness of displaying game content descriptors is not statistically significant. The average of adolescents is 2.67, and the average of others is 2.78. The mean difference is 0.11. The recognition level of the game rating and administration committees average is 1.73 for adolescents, and the average is 1.76 for others. It is found to be not statistically significant. The support level of the game rating and administration committee is statistically significant. The average is 3.68 for adolescents, and the average is 3.14 for others. The difference between the average is 0.54. The results show that others are relatively more supportive of the activities of the game rating and administration committee than adolescents. Negative game recognition is statistically significant. The average is 3.04 for adolescents, and average is 2.60 for others. The difference between the average is 0.44. The results show that others are relatively more likely to recognize games negatively than adolescents. We verified the difference between level of recognition and usefulness of the game rating classification, level of recognition of the game content descriptors, level of support for game rating and administration committee, and level of recognition for games. In this study, it is meaningful to verify differences in recognition by generation and generate primary data for in-depth analysis. According to the media-more panic theory, this negative recognition of new media is likely to support its regulatory policy. Accordingly, groups with a high level of negative game recognition are likely to support the game rating classification enforcement and the game content descriptors, which has properties such as adolescent protection and regulation. The difference of recognition between others and adolescents in this study indirectly supports the discussion of media moral panic. However, the limitation was that it did not consider other variables that might affect the relationship between the variables. In particular, to more actively accept the media moral panic theory's point of view, it is necessary to investigate in more detail and recognition of each policy or group for the host institutions. Future research is expected to complement these limitations and further refine and concrete research on the system and recognition by generations about games. Thank you. If you have a question, please send an email to this.